All right. I'm here with Sam today. Um, for those who don't know, Sam and I, we used to go to school together, and he's a poet,
Mm-hmm.
a minister as well.
Yep, minister.
And I'm just gonna be asking Sam a little bit about his childhood and his projects coming up and everything that he's done so far, just to get a little bit of insight to what he's doing in the Mooresville, Iredell County area.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so to start, do you want to tell us a little bit about your childhood?
Yeah. So growing up, I've always been in church. I've always been, ever since I was about maybe 8 or 9, I've always been like speaking in front of churches and congregations.
Yeah.
People would tell me like growing up that I'm a prophet or I'm a pastor and that like that's my calling, and I would agree with them. Like I believe that's like to a degree that's something I was called to do growing up. But like growing up in church so much and doing that, you know what I'm saying, I got a little burned out. And because I'm a person who's all about me, and sometimes I fight for approval, sometimes I fight for attention. So like sometimes it was a struggle just getting up there and dealing with the internal battle of, yo, why are you really doing this? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
are you doing it for God? Are you doing it for your mom's approval? Like, what are you really doing? So like growing up, I've always been in church. I've always been active in church. I've always been speaking. My mom actually used to write a lot of plays and direct a lot of her own skits for churches and for other people. And she would always invite me, she would always drag me, not really invite me, drag me into, hey, play this part. Can you do these lines? Let me run through these lines with you. Let me do this with you. Practice projecting your voice, practice showing emotion. And then like ever since then, I've pretty much, ever since I was at a young age, without realizing it, I've always been involved with just speaking in front of people.
Right.
Now, like, I didn't really start writing poetry and really start writing anything until I was about maybe in 4th grade. I at that time, I would just say they were love letters. So like, I'd see a girl, because I mean, I've gained a little weight, as you can see from those who know me in my younger days. I've gained a little weight, but like growing up, I was so over heavy and so overweight that the only way I could ever get a girl to like really be interested in me is if I wrote like a love letter, which is we call poetry. So
Right.
I'd write like sweet little letters, probably about maybe this long. I ain't gonna lie, I started out with the classic roses are red, violets are blue type
Yeah.
thing, but then put my own twist on it. And I've always been writing letters since I was young, just to get approval from females, just to woo them, because I was like, oh man, I know how to put emotion in my words, I know how to project it, so let me just write this. And I ain't gonna lie, y'all, I mean, as much as I wanted to be a player, at that time, I got
Just
maybe
wasn't
like
happy.
3 or 4 girls
Yeah.
who actually thought I was really good and actually liked my poetry because they thought I was really sweet.
Right.
But I've been writing ever since then, and I never realized it was poetry till about maybe just a couple years ago. I was like, oh, dude, like I wrote poetry because
But you didn't think of it as poetry.
yeah, I didn't think of it as poetry. I just thought of it as like love letters. I
Yeah.
just thought of it as me just writing sweet things to girls in a way that would just melt them, because I was a sucker for romantic comedies.
Yeah, I got
So,
you.
I've always been a person with words, and like I said, I like to speak. But I really didn't start getting into, you could say, poetry, until there was a homegirl of mine, rest in peace, Felicia. And she used to live over there on Deaton Street, over there by West Front Street in downtown Statesville. And Felicia was a unique human being who wrote poetry, who wrote raps to songs, and super cool, super chill, had like this old vibey to her, and she was just really cool and always trying to encourage me to be the best I can be as it relates to speaking to people. But
She was sort of like your inspiration in a way.
yeah, she was my inspiration. And whenever she passed away, that's when I really started getting into poetry, because I wanted to do something in honor of her. And she actually has a book that I grabbed whenever she passed away, full of her poems. So, yeah, that's kind of like how I started. That's kind of how my childhood was. I've just always been involved with speaking. I've always had a heart. I can say now that I've always had a heart for like reaching to the community, reaching to people, talking to people about Jesus, because I mean that's where my roots are at, you know.
Right. And so my second question, which would sort of stem from that, is what was your school life like? I know you answered a little bit about that, and you would be writing poems. But is there anything else about your school life that you'd like to share?
I mean, growing up, like in school, we take classes on poetry, but I never like really paid attention in those, because the way I like to write poetry is I don't like to actually really think about it when I write it.
Yeah.
A lot of times when I write, I just honestly pray before I write and just ask the Lord to just take the lead. And I try as much as possible. People don't understand this, but like I understand it as much as possible. When I'm writing something, I just pray before I write, and I just say, God, take the lead. Let my words be your words. And I just start putting the pen to the paper. I don't try to think about what I'm writing. I guess you could say it's freestyling, but without actually freestyling, it's really just writing it.
Right.
But I try not to think about it. So school, had taught me like the basic schemes of rhyming and patterns, but really I never really applied any of that, honestly. Like me, that's why I consider myself to be really different than a lot of other poets and people out here, is because I have such an unorthodox style where I don't focus on, what I'm going to say. I just do it. I just say it, And I might write something, and then a week later I come back and look at it, and I'm like, dude, I didn't even realize I wrote that.
And that's really where the deepest stuff comes
from. Yeah,
is when you don't overthink it.
Yeah, it's just coming straight out the top of the head, man.
Yeah. Well, you've already answered what your draw to poetry was. Do you have any of your biggest inspirations? I mean, I thought of this question thinking like celebrities, but mentioning the girl that inspired you, were there any others? It could be celebrities, people.
I tend to not look at other poets. Most of my inspiration comes from rappers, as it relates, because when you read and look at my poetry, I'm all about flow. I have a lot of metaphors, punchlines, but most of my inspiration comes from the great Kendrick Lamar. I'm just a huge Kendrick Lamar fan, man. And when I hear his music, I know it's rap, but to me it's poetry. And when I see something like him writing something in his album, came out 2015, it was To Pimp a Butterfly, that really like changed the way I viewed art, because it like really challenged me. It was like, yo man, I want to write something like that. I want to write something better than that. And it was just such a draw to me when I would listen to his music and listen to his cadence and his flow and his style. But recently, as I started linking with my man Joseph Isaiah, shout out to Godflow, shout out to Isaiah, and he told me, he was like, yo man, you have so much inspiration from all these other people, but you should really be your own biggest inspiration. You should be your biggest fan. And ever since he had told me that, I feel like that's really launched me to separate me from other people, because it's like, I've always been a humble dude, but to a degree you have to have a lot of confidence in yourself to get up there and do stuff. You have to you have to be your biggest fan. And ever since he told me that, I was like, yo, that really changed the way I view, because now I can go into performances and I'm not trying to be like Kendrick Lamar. I'm trying to be Sam. I'm trying to be me. I'm trying to do exactly how I would say it. I'm trying to do what I want to do. I know I talk a lot, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just trying to be me. I'm trying to do what I feel natural, because if I'm my own biggest fan, you know what I'm saying, that's what I really want to focus on.
And
is
that's
just my
really
style.
how all the greats are.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta be your biggest fan.
Yeah, it's key to success.
Yeah.
What was your call to the ministry? I know you grew up in that field, but do you remember a specific point in your life where you really knew that you wanted to preach in the form of poetry and stuff like that, like what you're doing now?
I've always, like I said, been preaching in churches, and I thought it'd be dope, man. Like, we have people we entitle as Christian rappers.
Yeah.
And you look at the greats like Lecrae, and how he doesn't like to be put in a box as just a Christian rapper, but just a rapper who loves the Lord. Right. And that's kind of how, like, I view it, is I'm a poet, and I have all these many different talents and things that I like to do, but I don't only, if you read my work, like I don't only talk about God.
Right.
Like I talk a lot about,
Especially on the new EP, like
Yeah.
that was some personal stuff.
yeah, I talk about issues like involving me at a time when I was being held hostage, or I talk about me fighting for other people's approval, and I talk about things that are weighing really on my mind, like I could be thinking about my roommate or something, and something that he told me the other day, and it's like, yo, man, that's really weighing on my heart. Let me just talk about his life for a sec. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, let me just like like that's how I write. Is like I have an idea of what I'm gonna say, and because it's in my heart a lot. Because I feel like if you don't write from the heart, it's not gonna come out the way you want to. You want to write about personal things. You don't want to talk about stuff that you've never really experienced.
The best stuff comes from
Yeah. So like, I was just like, man, I can bring ministry into poetry and it'd be perfectly fine. Like I can talk about the Lord. I can talk about my own personal opinions, my own personal addictions, my battles, my brother's battles. I could talk about my family. Like there's tons of different stuff like I can talk about, and it's just not put in one specific box. You know what I'm saying? I can
Yeah.
talk about other things. But so I guess I've always been really somebody who's just been involved with poetry and involved in ministry and that.